In a mysterious underground laboratory, Gary and Steve are examining their home lives when they're unexpectedly hindered by Wendy, who illuminates to them Stockholm has fizzled, meaning it's just them and Japan left. Notwithstanding, the men don't look stressed in light of the fact that Japan has forever been number one and this American lab has forever been a nearby second, so they ought to have the option to complete the task without issues. In the interim, 5 undergrads are preparing for their getaway. There's Dana, who is attempting to fail to remember her undertaking with a teacher, Brief, and his girlfriend Jules, Holden, and Marty, who is now smoking when he joins the group. They load a VR with every one of their things, including Ter's bicycle, and leave to put in a couple of days in a cabin in the woods. On the top of their home, a dubious man tells his bosses the group is coming. When they're far sufficiently out and about, Jules sees they don't have a signal, and Marty makes sense of that is the whole point, to get off the lattice and unwind. Simultaneously, Gary and Steve start preparing the computers in the lab's control room. They likewise meet Daniel, the new room security officer, who believes he's prepared for whatever might occur. In a little while, the group stops at a gas station, in spite of the fact that it looks deserted and they can't figure out whether the pumps work by any stretch of the imagination. Holden enters the building to examine and track down an assortment of extremely frightening things, just to unexpectedly be surprised by Mordecai. The man realizes about the cabin they're looking at, making sense of he's seen bunches of proprietors travel every which way. He gives them bearings on the most proficient method to arrive at the spot, bringing up that the gas they have is sufficient to get them there, however, getting back it's their anxiety. He additionally affronts Jules, and Terse needs to punch him for it, however, Holden rapidly keeps him down and the group chooses to leave before things get terrible. After a couple of additional miles of driving, the group takes a tunnel under a mountain, which is the best way to arrive at these woods since there's a wide gorge encompassing it. As the VR cruises by, a bird flies excessively close yet gets hit by an invisible wall, uncovering this area is encircled by a force field. Minutes after the fact, the group comes to the cabin and starts unloading their things. Holden tracks down a very unpleasant painting in his room and puts it down, just to find there's a one-way mirror into Dana's room. At the point when Holden acknowledges he can see Dana transforming, he quickly shouts at her to stop and calls everybody to show them the mirror. After a couple of jokes are broken, Holden offers Dana to change rooms, which Dana's extremely thankful for. Then she sees she can see Holden changing too, so she takes care of the painting back. She finds it rather frightening as well and chooses to cover it with a cover. Back to the lab, it turns out they're recording what's happening inside the cabin. They examine an approaching situation change and some way or another gain admittance to the understudy's blood tests, which demonstrate the synthetic compounds they've established in Jules' hair color are working perfectly and have expanded her drive. Their discussion is out of nowhere hindered by a call from Mordecai, who tells them the understudies are coming and starts teaching about their purging for everyone's benefit. He treats this so in a serious way that Gary and Steve can giggle. While the companion group goes through their day at the lake, Gary and Steve start taking wagers on what the understudies will pick at the cabin. Daniel thinks this is all fairly cruel, yet Wendy calls attention to the need to lose steam to make this extremely challenging position more straightforward. At the point when Daniel contemplates whether the higher-ups have some familiarity with this, Steve makes sense of their bosses don't mind as long as the gig is done. Daniel additionally believes it's unjustifiable to wager on a result that is controlled by them, however, Steve and Gary say the framework isn't that way, the understudies will be directed to the cellar, yet the last decision is theirs to make. They decided to disregard Mordecai's advance notice and provided that they pick again they can be rebuffed. At the point when the sun sets, the companion group plays Truth or Dare. Jules is thought for even a second to kiss a wolf head that holds tight to the wall, and she does while acting like a tart, which is strange for her. Then, at that point, Dana picks Dare, and at that point, an entryway on the floor opens behind them, the graciousness of the lab individuals. The understudies put it on the breeze and conclude Dana's challenge is to go into that cellar. At the point when she does as such, she finds it's brimming with frightening articles, similar to an old piano and appalling dolls. Out of nowhere the image of a young lady surprises Dana and she shouts, making the others descend too. Marty turns on a light and they find much more frightening stuff, which makes Marty figure they shouldn't remain down here, particularly when he hears a voice murmuring to him. The others overlook him and begin looking around at things like a music box with a ballerina and an oddball. However, their inquiry is intruded on by Dana, who has tracked down a diary. She peruses entries making sense of that the main family that possessed this house was tormented by the dad, and the little girl found a book for certain requests that would carry the Holy Soul to them. There are a couple of lines in Latin on the page, and Marty asks Dana not to understand them, but rather Dana does it in any case. This makes the cadavers of the family return from death, and individuals at the lab praise that the workers from maintenance won the bet. It turns out their bet depended on what monster would go after the understudies, relying upon what thing they played with. Daniel actually can't completely accept that gods and magic are genuine, and Steve is disheartened they will not get to see a merman since it never gets picked. Then, at that point, he and Gary mind the screens that show a similar occupation is being done everywhere. Every other country has fizzled with the exception of Japan. In a Japanese school, little kids are managing a dreadful phantom. Subsequently, the companion group goes upstairs and Terse and Jules keep on acting unusually. Terse continues to drink and make jerk remarks, while Jules moves in a provocative way and playfully plays with Marty. Since the other three aren't in the mindset any longer, Terse and Jules leave to have protection in the forest. Marty inquires as to whether she doesn't see that their companions are acting unusual, and he admits he's inclined like there are a few puppeteers behind this. Dana lets him know it's simply the symptoms of what he's smoking, so Marty chooses to go to his bedroom and rest. Presently they're distant from everyone else. Dana joins Holden on the love seat and they wind up kissing. In the meantime, Terse is attempting to persuade Jules to get lively in the forest, yet Jules would rather not strip since it's cold. Individuals at the lab are disheartened on the grounds that they need to see some activity, so they discharge pheromones to alter Jules' perspective. As 2 or 3 starts getting in that frame of mind, the technicians likewise turn on an exceptional light to make a heartfelt spot on the grass. Brief and Jules rest and begin getting going, making Jules show her chest to the cameras. Daniel contemplates whether this is going excessively far, yet Steve makes sense of the need to keep the client fulfilled. Unexpectedly, a zombie appears and cuts Jules' hand. She runs back and Abrupt leaps in to protect her, however, the zombie wounds him in the shoulder. Terse drives him away and eliminates the blade from his shoulder, just to see a subsequent zombie show up. This one purposes a chain to thump Brief down and afterward catch Jules. The main zombie gets Brief to make him see how the entire zombie family kills Jules with a corroded saw. At the lab, Steve and Gary say a request, demonstrating Jules' demise is a contribution, and Steve pulls down a switch to make Jules' blood fall into a mysterious contraption. At the cabin, Marty hears the voice once more and chooses to take a walk. To begin with, he stops to alleviate himself, and notices there are no stars overhead. One of the zombies abruptly shows up and gradually starts to move toward him, however at that point Brief appears, drives the zombie away, and carries Marty into the house. Brief then let everybody know that Jules is dead and that they need to leave. Against Marty's alerts, Dana opens the entryway and finds another zombie, who tosses Jules' head at her. Dana shouts as Abrupt and Holden hurry to lock the entryway, keeping the zombie outside. Terse brings up it's critical to remain together for the well-being and that they need to blockade each window and entryway. This might make the occupation hard for the lab, so the technicians discharge a bewildering gas that rolls out. Terse improves his brain, and he reports they ought to part rather than make more progress. Every understudy races to their separate room and the technicians lock their entryways. Marty hurries to stop the window and inadvertently thumps a light, which breaks and uncovers a secret camera. Steve contacts the chem lab to get something that will make him neglect, yet Gary stops him since there's as of now a zombie on the way. As Marty ponders, on the off chance that this is an unscripted TV drama, he leans his body against the window, and the zombie breaks the glass to get him and toss him outside. Both of them trade a couple of hits, yet the zombie cuts Marty and hauls him into the forest. Then, at that point, the technicians pull the switch once more, and it's shown that Marty's blood is shipped off a stone carving. The ground under the cabin starts to shake, and a zombie gets through Dana's window. She starts sobbing for help, and Holden breaks the mirror between their rooms to bring her over to his. There's another zombie attempting to break in there also, and when Holden moves the bed to obstruct the assault, Dana finds another cellar entryway. She utilizes a light to really look at its protection, and when Terse stops by to go along with them, Holden lets him know he can't open the entryway, so Brief ought to conceal in the basement. Holden and Dana enter the new cellar and find a progression of startling tools that make Dana understand here the dad killed the family. Unexpectedly, the cellar entryway opens and a zombie seems to utilize a chain to catch Holden. Dana promptly snatches him as well and brings him back into the cellar prior to getting any instrument she can find around to wound the zombie until it can move no more. Gary enacts a switch that makes the blade in Dana's grasp shock her, making her drop it so she can't shield herself any longer. Unexpectedly, another entryway opens and Terse appears from a connecting basement room. He's found an exit plan to tell Holden and Dana. They follow a dull hall until they arrive at an entryway that takes them outside. The triplet escapes in the VR without seeing the bloody hand-shaped impression on the entryway. In the meantime, the Japanese schoolgirls figure out how to exorcise the ghost. It is the only one remaining to mean the American team. Wendy calls Steve and Gary to berate them for having been so pompous about the entire thing and reminds them to treat this in a serious way since they can't allow the ancients to rise. At that point, Gary sees the VR is going to arrive at the tunnel, which ought not to be open. Gary races to check what's keeping the demolition team from causing the collapse and finds there was a glitch in the system. As the VR enters the tunnel, Gary fixes the wires, lastly makes the tunnel break down. Brief responds rapidly and drives in reverse to escape before they're squashed. The main way out would be to hop across the gorge, however, they have no ropes. Terse chooses to attempt to get around with his bicycle since he's done a few major leaps previously. Tragically, when Terse leaps, he raises a ruckus around the town wall and is shocked prior to falling into the pit. Dana understands that Marty was correct about somebody controlling things in the background, and the technicians utilize Abrupt's blood to fill another stone carving. Holden and Dana get in the VR and drive back to the cabin on the grounds that Holden figures they could track down a street behind it. His words are unexpectedly hindered by a blade coming at him from behind, in a split second killing him. Dana shouts when she sees there's a zombie in the VR, which is presently going off the street and falling into the lake. The zombie attempts to get Dana, yet she simply swims away while the technicians at the lab celebrate with a drink. Daniel fails to really see the reason why they're cheerful considering Dana is alive. However, Steve makes sense of the penance of the Immaculate is discretionary for however long it's done endure and she will experience it first. While Dana arrives at the wharf and is gone after a zombie, the lab workers set up a party. The demolition team stays cautious and says the glitch was brought about by a power reroute from upstairs, which Gary thinks doesn't seem okay. Then, at that point, the phone associated with individuals upstairs starts ringing, and Steve gets the call to discover that one of the penances is as yet alive, so the ritual hasn't been finished. The zombie on the wharf is going to kill Dana when abruptly Marty makes an appearance to help her. Both of them hit the zombie to make it fall into the lake, then, at that point, they take off, mindful that the zombies are as yet following them. Marty causes Dana to enter one of the graves, where the zombie that took Marty is on the floor in pieces after Marty dealt with it with a scoop. The spot doesn't seem to be grave, it's more like a metal box with an electrical panel. Marty initiates it and opens an entryway on the floor that brings them into a box-like elevator. The pair enters it and the elevator starts moving around in a wide range of headings. At the point when it stops for a couple of moments, a werewolf runs into the wall, attempting to get at them. Then, at that point, the elevator moves once more, and each time it stops, Marty and Dana meet another monster. Dana starts coordinating the monsters with the articles they had found in the cellar and understands the puppeteers may pick what might kill them. There are many monsters down here, trusting that their turn will be delivered for the show. While Dana has a breakdown, the technicians alarm as they examine how to continue. Wendy finds that the team missed one of Marty's supplies, so he's been smoking without the technician's synthetic compounds and became resistant to the stuff. At the point when the elevator at long last stops, the entryway's open to uncover a watchman that needs to take Dana. Nonetheless, the zombie arm on the floor moves and gets the person, allowing Marty and Dana the opportunity to push him against the wall and take him out. Then, at that point, they take the zombie's blade and the watchman's gun prior to going down a passage, where a female voice starts making sense of their essential for something greater and their responsibility is to mollify the Ancient Ones. At that point, more monitors appear, so Dana and Marty race to conceal themselves inside a small control room. Dana sees the panel and presses the button, making every one of the monsters get away from their cages. Presently, disarray assumes control over the building as the monsters kill anybody they track down in their way, from watchmen to researchers. The power goes out in the principal control room and something attempts to separate the entryway while Marty and Dana are unexpectedly frightened by a mythical serpent bat. They take off, evading or taking shots at the monsters that attempt to get them and enter an opening in the wall that brings them into a secret tunnel. In the control room, Gary and Wendy are attempting to get the way to their crisis tunnel open. Daniel is killed by the scarecrows, yet prior to passing on he enacts a grenade that wrecks Steve. On the floor, he's frustrated to see that the merman is quite monstrous before the monster kills him. As giant arms get through the roof and get Wendy, Gary at last figures out how to open the crisis entryway and he runs down the secret tunnel, where he unintentionally catches Dana and her blade. Prior to biting the dust, Gary requests that Dana kill Marty. A while later, Marty gives Dana the gun and the pair goes down the tunnel to track down a chamber with 5 gigantic stone carvings, of which 4 are loaded up with blood. Dana understands each carving addresses an individual from the companion group and this is every one of the penance rituals. Marty asks why they simply don't kill them quickly and straightforwardly, and Dana brings up they likely need to see them rebuffed. Abruptly the female voice from before affirms they were rebuffed for being youthful and the director appears, making sense of that this ritual was made to assuage the Ancient Ones. They're giant evil gods that rest under the lab and they'll stir to annihilate Earth in the event that the ritual isn't finished. There is just a short time before the sun comes up, so Marty should kick the bucket for others to get by. Marty doesn't need the world to inhabit the cost of his companion's demise, however, Dana comprehends everyone's benefit and focuses the gun on Marty as she is sorry. At that point, a werewolf shows up behind Dana, and on second thought of cautioning her, Marty apologizes as well. The werewolf assaults Dana, making her drop the gun. The director and Marty attempt to get it simultaneously and Marty wins by driving the director away. Then, at that point, he takes shots at the werewolf, making it take off. The director comes after Marty and stirs something up while a zombie with a hatchet shows up in the room. Dana sees it and cautions Marty, so when the zombie raises the hatchet, Marty involves the director as a safeguard and she winds up dead, all things considered. Marty dismisses them both from the edge of the stage, and since the director and the zombie aren't important for the ritual, the ground shakes for a couple of moments, declaring the approaching awakening of the Ancient Ones. While sitting tight for the end, Marty and Dana apologize to one another while sharing one final smoke. Unexpectedly, a giant arm bursts through the ground, obliterating the lab and the cabin, and the remainder of Earth is strayed away.